All right, let's kick it off. All right, everybody, welcome to my new talk called Mastering the Code Review Process, Boosting Your Code Quality in Your Organization. I figured having boost in the title would give me an extra leg in getting into this conference. All right. So who here gets their code reviewed? Who here thinks the code review process could do with improvement? All right, I'm going to say maybe 60, 70%. And who here gives code reviews? All right, you might be part of the problem. All right, so I'm in Bloomberg, so my name's Pete Muldoon. When you have questions near the end, and I can take some questions during it, you'll see at the bottom here there's a slide number. If you use that, it's really helpful for me to find out what you were talking about. And I know we've all got notebooks with pens in front of them, so it shouldn't be too big a lift. Okay. So who am I? Who is this vaguely disreputable looking guy standing up on the stage? All right, well, I started using C++ way back in the day when we didn't have standards or libraries or anything. We had basically just to do everything ourselves. My professional career has mainly been in system analysis and architecture. I did 21 years as a consultant, and that gave me like a broad perspective of what works at a lot of companies and what doesn't, okay? And when I come to a conference, and I say this a lot, is I try to do talks that are based in the real world. So it's somehow demonstrating either a particular viewpoint or some kind of principle, something you can take back and hopefully maybe try and use on Monday morning, right? Not something that you're waiting for C++ 29 to give you, all right? So where will we be going this talk? Like, what are we going to be looking at? So we're going to be looking at how we do an effective technical code review process. All right, and as part of that, we're going to look at what's the consequences of having poor technical code reviews or a poor process. We're going to also then talk about the fundamental elements that are in an effective code review. What does it take to get effective code review, and what does an actual code review mean? And then we'll talk about tracking and measuring, right? There's a lot of thoughts out there. If you can't track it and measure it, you're never going to get a handle on it. And we're going to see about reviewing, improving your code review culture, which is a lot more spongier thing to get a handle on, all right? And this talk is rooted in real world enterprise environments. And the reason it's real in the real world is this is something I've been struggling with for about the last year, right, in my company. How do we make these things work? How do we get more effective code reviews? So where we won't be going in this talk, all right, is that the kind of very touchy-feely emotional things that go on about they're tangentially touched upon, but I'm not really going to go very deep into that. And the formatting, all right, so I see that, I don't know, 50% of coding standards and reviews seems to be about, do you put an underscore after a member function, or members? What is your function, snake case, camel case, all this stuff? I could care less about that. That's something that you should have automated probably anyway, or have something that, you know, it's well known how you do this stuff, and I won't be reviewing that kind of stuff. So let's talk about terminology. I like to get a shared understanding when we start off with this. So a code review is actually what would we call a technical critique of a piece of code. Okay, so the question is, Pete, what is a critique? Anybody know what a critique is? All right, nobody. You're glad I'm here. All right, so it comes from that Greek word, I think it's kritikos, which is able to judge or render judgment, okay? And when you look at it in the dictionaries and stuff, it says it's a formal analysis or evaluation of your own or someone else's work. So it's not just other people's work. You can critique your own work. And it's a careful judgment in which you give your opinion about the good and the bad parts. All right, something's going on with my slide, but you get what I mean, right? The good and the bad parts is what you're looking at, not just all the bad stuff. All right. There is a close cousin of a critique, and it's called criticism by the critic, right? And I think we do this way too often. It's really the reviewer has his own goals. It's not trying to help the guy who's having the review made on him. And it's more like tearing someone down or passing judgment, right? This is terrible, this is crap, you know, even stick a knee in there on the code review process because you don't really like the guy, right? So you put all this stuff in, but this is not really helpful to code reviews. So there's three main flavors of critique, all right? And I have my helpful little dragony hydra down here, right? We have constructive, instructive, and destructive, right? Constructive critique, or what we call constructive criticism sometimes, is where we say, Here's the problem, but here's some solutions. We're trying to help someone out, right? You also have the instructive critique, where you're trying to teach someone something, where you're like, listen, you're using inheritance here, but I think it would be better if we use templates or type erasure, and you show them something new, and you know, we get more bonding within your team. And of course, we have the one, and he's the little guy who's got the fangs out there, the destructive, right? You code, this sucks, it's got bugs in it, right? And you smell it. So, like, you know, I don't like anything that's in this thing here. This just causes friction in your team. So let's take a perspective here, right? What are the core objectives of a code review? Anyone? It makes me slightly worried that of everyone here who said they do code reviews and don't know what the goals of a code review process is.
Consistency?
Consistency, maybe, yes.
Improve product quality.
That's a good one.
Catch bugs.
Yes, catch bugs.
Create value.
Create value, not bad, right? I'm going to sort of smelt that down into to ensure that code changes are correct, maintainable, and fit for purpose. People like this definition?
Yes.
It's incomplete, right? There's also a time element, right? We've got to support fast feature development. After all, no matter how genius our coding is, if it doesn't hit production, it's of no value whatsoever. Yes?
I'd also argue shared understanding.
Yes, you're ahead of me. Good man yourself. You must be very touchy-feely, right? It's also about maintaining the long-term health of your code base, all right? We tend to focus on correct. Is this correct? Is it giving us the right result? All right, and if you've seen another talk I gave on the software engineering pyramid of needs, right? We also should be looking at the long-term health. If you're not doing that, I'm going to say something controversial, you're not an engineer, you're a coder. All right, you should be looking at the long-term health of your code base. But like I said, this gets looked over as well. We are looking for fast feature delivery, not fast buggy features, just fast features, right? But what are the less obvious objectives of a code review?
Shared understanding. Shared understanding,
yeah, right? Promoting knowledge sharing. People get to know what other people are doing. What else? Very, very hard nose, right? Shared ownership. All right, if we're all working on a piece of code as part of the review, giving this stuff in, we're all taking ownership, all right? By the way, if a bug gets through a code review, who's responsible? The guy who coded up or the guy that reviewed?
Both. Reviewer.
I would say but was it 50-50?
You don't have to draw lines.
I'd say 80-20, right? Mm-hmm. The reviewer is probably the one I would stretch the neck over the chopping block, right? Not the guy who did it. And lastly, it spreads the workload. All right, if there's just one guy doing all the code reviews, he's probably dissatisfied, wants to get out of there. Right, his day, he's not in his happy place if he's just reviewing other people's code. Right? Don't ask me how I know. All right, so more perspective. In software engineering, how would you rank the following developer skills? Right? That's a rough thing, I think, would be, lots of people might put coffee at the top. All right, but I think reviewing is almost a third-class citizen when we talk about software engineering. It's like an afterthought. Yeah, we all know how to review, but the really big things are solution design. Who does a solution design that doesn't get reviewed? Or write code that doesn't get reviewed, right? You don't do anything that doesn't get reviewed, unless you're a one-person shop, maybe, right? So that's how important review is. But I was out there trying to drag, because I like metrics and hard data on this stuff, right? And I looked at this code report by Smart Bear, and they did a survey. I think it was 1,000 people, so not terribly big. But they asked, what was the number one way to code quality? And the top answer was code review, right? They told that the number one way a company can improve code quality is through code review. And after that, the second one was unit testing. And it's funny, these are the two things I'm driving in my area and work right now, both unit testing and code quality, all right? Followed by continuous integration and testing. I have a rationale for this. So why is the review so important, right? You read more code than you write. Is there anyone here writing more code than they read? Because you have your eyes shut, all right, if you're doing it, right? You have to at least read your own code. You can't make changes in any piece of your code base that's existing without looking and understand what's there, what's around it, what's going to interact with it, what are the side effects. Okay, so you just can't get away with like not reading code. It's also the last line of defense, right? Now we go, look, we're all really intelligent developers. We would never do the wrong thing in code. And yet I look at code bases full chock-a-block with technical debt. So where is it getting in? It's probably the code review process is what's letting it in. Because the testing won't catch it, right? Your tech debt will build up. I mean, 5 years down the road, you might catch it when you're not able to do stuff very quickly in your code base, but by then you're kind of dug yourself that big hole. And it can be a force multiplier for good practice, right? It's an opportunity to disseminate information, right? Let the junior people of your group learn, right? And there's another survey, I don't have it up here, but it was, I think, 30% of teams use code review process as a way to onboard new members. Okay, so, right? Now here's the thing that may cause some controversy, right? It is unlikely to be replaced by AI. Now, every talk I've heard here about AI doing stuff well says, but I had to correct it on a few things. All right, and if you look out there on surveys and reports, everyone is saying like the AI is very helpful, can get 80%, 90% of the way there, but you have to review it at the end, right? Review it. So it's not going away. If you're a reviewer, your job's not going away, right? If you're a coder, maybe. All right, so let's talk about code review tensions. So code reviews have kind of what I call mutually exclusive things, like things pulling in the opposite direction, right? So we have standards, right? Some standards we think are too rigid. And usually when you have a rigid standard or people don't want to follow it, the excuses are, doesn't really apply here. What I'm doing is kind of fairly, niche, or I'm really doing something very good, or it's, the old chestnut of better done than perfect. Which I agree, but it's not better done badly than perfect, all right? Our perfect is the enemy of good. Now, where standards are too lax, which really means you don't have one, all right, you get a lot of this quick win mentality. Let's for now jam something in. Let's not even test it. Get it in there, believe me, I know it works, all right? And that's how we get tech debt and outages in production. So that's one kind of tension. The other kind of tensions we have is timing. All right, so code reviews are rushed. And by rushed, I mean that they're not given a proper in-depth review. In other words, someone just looks at it and goes, someone told me yesterday, it's the approverino stamp, I think it was, all right? It was just like, yes, it looks like code, boom, let it through, right? You didn't cause a compilation error, right? Or, and the other thing that happens is, and this is, I guess, getting more into the human side of things, is you see a code review, you don't really know what's going on, and you're afraid to either challenge it or ask, because you might think like, I look a bit of a dummy because everyone else is nodding their head, right? But they may be doing the same thing you're doing. And that's how more bad code gets into production. When you have what I call tardy code reviews, I wait 2 weeks for a review to get looked at, right? It's a priority problem. People prioritize writing code over reviewing code. And that's a bad practice, because if I just finish my writing code and I say to John, will you review my code? And John says, yes, but I'm in the middle of doing my own code. I'll do it when I'm finished. And 3 days later, he comes back and he says, well, I finished that piece of code. Pete, you review that, and I'm going to look at your stuff. And I go, well, I'm in the middle of my stuff. I'll talk to you in 3 days, right? And those delays add up, and you find that your velocity just comes to a crawl. All right, and I'll talk about it a little later. I had a group where changing this part of things made the feature velocity just incredibly fast. Other ones we have is scope, right? We have minimalist or what I call an expansive scope, right? So in minimalist terms, you say, I have one thing and one thing only I address in a PR, which on the face of it is not a bad way to go about it, right? Got a nice short PR. But if you're just looking at the 2 lines of code you're changing, you may be missing broader contexts or refactoring opportunities, okay? And on the other side, you have the expansive, where you say, I'm going to leave the code in a better state than you found it. You refactor as needed, okay? But then you might start sticking stuff in. I just want to put one more thing in here, right? And you made your code reviews big, and the one more thing might be trivial, but it might be the reason you have to roll back your production code. Right, if it's not wrapped in feature flags. And another one is on new feature use. I run into this a lot because it's a legacy code base, and I say, I know 1995 is calling and saying this is the way we should be doing things, but that's been outdated. All right, and you get these things where it's like, let's keep everything consistent. I had a chat just, 2 weeks ago, where this whole team pulled me in and they were saying, we're making a change in this old code base. And all the for loops use a counter. We're thinking of using an iterator, but now we're not consistent. What do you think, Pete? And I said, I think you should be using arranged for, right? Not either any of these things, right? Not arranged, Steve. I'm not up on that yet, and I got to take baby steps. But it was like, look, the other thing is modern, where you say every new thing I can, right? Everything's arranged. Everything should be in a coroutine. Everything should be whatever's string view, whatever's the latest thing that's coming hot off the presses, right? So we have these contending standards on viewpoints, right? They all can go to an extreme one way or another, so we have to find balance. And that means a shared understanding of what that balance should be. Anyone, any questions or contention here? Everyone's in complete agreement? Cool. I think I'll upset you later on, right? So what happens with poor code reviews? What are the problems you get with poor code reviews?
Bugs.
Yeah, right? What are the consequences? Critical issues and defects go unnoticed, right? It gets through a poor or rushed superficial code review process, right? We get inconsistent code quality, meaning we're going to have bundles of tech debt getting shoved in. It's going to make our job more and more difficult over the years, right? And we then have poor development velocity because PRs might be sitting idle, again, waiting for people to review it. All right, or we're generating routinely these huge, complicated PRs that people struggle to figure out what's going on. All right, and when you're struggling to figure out what's something going on, you really don't want to get to that very soon, right? You want to put it on the long finger. And bike shedding, I see this a ton in code reviews, right? People focusing on commas or underscores or spaces, right? And little nitpicks when there's, you're trying to look at the solution. Everyone know what bike shedding is? Who put up your hands if you know what it means? All right, Steve, you're the only one who doesn't know?
Wait, I know now. It's on the slide.
No. Bike shedding is this principle of triviality. A guy, Parkinson, and he said that this committee was given a few things to do. One was design a nuclear reactor. The other was to design a shed for the bikes. And they spent most of their time on the bikes, right, because it's easy. So that's what we do. We'll focus on something that's easy instead of the tough, hard problems. It's human nature. So the other thing you get, right, if you're more interested in your people than just the code going out the door, is you get burnout, right? Small numbers of people doing all the reviews. It also can act as a bottleneck, right? This guy is overloaded with reviews and we're all like stuck behind him waiting for him to give us the go ahead. Right, and it's also missed learning opportunities and team friction, right? Where the senior engineers are just, we don't need you junior guys in these discussions. We're going to figure out what happens and then you just do it, right? And no explanation of reasoning. This is bad, do it this way. Instead of explaining why it's bad or have you considered this other way of doing things. All right. Any questions on that?
What about single points of failure?
Okay, what about them?
If your code reviews are poor, you aren't actually getting that knowledge to everybody else.
Yeah, that's what we call distributing the workload, right? And I'm going to go into that. It also means training up. We don't do very much training on code reviews. Like go to that thing and learn how to use this. Go here, learn some functional programming. There's, far as I know, I haven't seen, go there and learn how to do a code review. Okay. So before you ask for a review, what should you be doing? I mean, the minute you hit that compile and it compiles, commit it, just go review it.
Review it yourself.
One of the key points. Yes, you should have a little checklist. All right. First thing on the checklist, right, have you taken done static code analysis and compiler warnings? And if you have, take care of. I don't know many times I look at a code compilation and I get reams and reams of warnings. All right, because no one ever bothered to take care of them. Okay. Also, has it passed all the unit and integration tests? And have you added new tests for whatever it is you changed? No matter how confident you are in your change, as a reviewer, I'm not as confident as you are. So I need some testing, okay? And then the thing you were talking about, David, right? Do a self-review. catch silly mistakes. Why are you going to give it to someone else when you're too lazy to review your own stuff? All right? So that's something, by the way, that is, you're all nodding like it's common sense. Do a self-review. People don't do it. I see the silliest thing in code and I go, oh, yeah. Right? Like they commented out a big chunk of code and they just left it in there, right? It's like, what is that, for posterity? A plaque? I mean, a memorial to the guys who did this that came before us? It's like, get rid of it. You want to see it, they can look in the Git history. Some of the things you'll be doing before you ask for review, right, is, and this is something that bugs the hell out of me, right? It's like we all forget how to use the English language when we write a title. It's really cryptic. The only thing worse than the title and description we write on unit tests, on our code reviews, and our PRs, is the way we name our classes, right? Where we figure like we drop out all the consonants and add something in. So write a proper title and description, and you should be focusing on what the change is that you're doing. All right. Now, you may say, look, just go look at my diff, figure it all out, and come back and say, well, this is what he was doing. He was changing some pricing model. But I don't want to do that. I want to see what you're trying to do, not what you may have accidentally done. And then the why. Again, why are we doing this? There should be a part in the description. Why? We're doing this because of X. Right? We're doing an upgrade to do with this. It's to do with some, I don't know, some date calculation stuff we're changing because we can't do the skipping, when we have the February 29th. All right? And the last thing is, how are you verifying that test? My testing will be boom, boom, boom. All right? Now, who here puts in PRs with no testing attached? Yeah, you're all, there's 5 honest people here, okay? I know you do it. Don't say you don't.
Sometimes it was caught on existing test.
Yeah, no, I'm saying there's no test. If you make a change, not a refactor, but a change in behavior, I can't see how a new test is needed, or addition to an old one. But those are the excuses I do here, and I'll tell you why I find out about these things, right? So one of the things when you're doing code preparation, right? If you take it easy on your reviewers, what happens? Your code review goes through pretty smoothly and quick. Right? I've never given a really simple PR that held up in the system. Right? So again, do your self-review first. Right? You should not have them catching your obvious errors, things that don't look right. And think of it, if you do a review first and you fix up the stuff you catch review in your own code, you don't have to wait for that big feedback back loop for someone else to get back to you in 3 or 6 or 2 weeks' time. Right? So you take a step out. Reduce the cognitive load. I don't know what it is that we figure the more we put in a PR, the better, right? The more pizzazz it looks. Like, break stuff down. One of the biggest tools we have for comprehension is breaking things down into steps. If you have a huge PR, it should probably be 2 or 3 PRs. You just have to figure out where the decoupling, and we can slice it in half. All right, you want to limit the size and scope. You don't want sneaky unrelated fixes getting in, because again, I've had to back out code because someone sneaked in a trivial fix that they figured, what the hell, right? I got a PR open. Why not put a few other things in that's just been bugging me? All right, and then you highlight where key changes are located. Again, I've looked at things where it's like there's 100 files change, and I think this is a massive PR. And I looked down through it, and a lot of it's just space being snipped off stuff. Someone had said to me, by the way, there's a lot of space stuff. The main changes are here. It helps people to just find it, not have to sieve through your bunch of, textual changes. Now, every time I only gave it once or twice, but when I gave a dry run, people always talk about a draft PR, right? Now, you think just because there's PR in the title, it's an automatic code review. It's not. A draft PR fundamentally different from a PR, right? Because a draft PR is usually just to do a proof of concept, say, am I on the right track, right? Identify fundamental flaws early. It's a mechanism for getting early feedback, right? It's not a mechanism for checking code into your repository. So I say any of the draft PRs you have, help the person out, but you don't apply the rules I'm giving you now to a draft PR. because at some stage that draft PR gets flipped to a regular PR, and then the hammer comes down, right? Then you get in there and you swipe at the code in a very gentle, understanding way. All right, so draft PR is not in scope. So let's talk about the life cycle of a code review. All right, I have my times arrow here. So here we are, we're coding. This is our happy place. All right, somewhere down the line, we might be to someone, hey, can you come over and look at this? I don't know why I'm getting this problem or how to use this piece of the interface. Then I'll say, look, here's the PR, it's the async review. I'll get some feedback. All right, a little later on, I'll incorporate that feedback when we get a moment to myself. I might have a review meeting. So depending on the amount of change or severity of the change, what I call the blast radius, I may drag it into a formal review meeting. Or if we get a lot of contention between two people who are reviewing the process, right, we pull them in for consensus. It gets accepted and then it gets merged. Okay? This is roughly the timeline. I'm going to show it in a different way. Again, I need times arrow. Here is the block of code development time that you're using. All right, we all love to be, no one's hassling you, you're doing coding, you're doing ranges, don't know what you're doing, but like everyone's happy, right? You come to the end of that block and you say, I want a PR done. So now you go into a halt state, all right? I mean, you go and you do other stuff, but essentially you're not able to progress any further until someone comes along and does that initial review. And once that initial review is done, you get feedback. You say, I've done this and I don't like that, and you send it back out, and the other person takes a look at it sometime later, and you can be trapped in this initial final, like just getting back and forth with reviews and feedback. But eventually, hopefully you come out of that and you're just waiting approval. And once you get approval, you merge. So remember, I talked about a time aspect of the PR, right? So this here's got a lot of stuff in it. How do we shorten things in this thing here, right? So we can go after, I don't want to go after the code development, it's not part of the review process, but everything else is up for grabs. So let's look at the initial review and talk about code review sizing. Now, wiser minds than me have said size matters, right? And it does, especially in code reviews. All right, so if you have large, huge, mega changes, they always take a long time to move through the process, right? Because it's hard to spot potential problems on something that's so big or so serpentine. I don't know about you, but I've always got a bit of worry about approving a huge PR, right? Because I believe the reviewer is more responsible. So if I say, look, I don't really know what's going on here, but damn it, I'll approve it anyhow, right? I've sat on it for a week. I don't want to do that because I'm worried about it blowing up in production and my name being attached to it, right? And it's okay for simple, right? I rename a function or I do the space thing. It doesn't matter how many files it is. You just say it's a very simple change just over a lot of files. They always go through quick as well. But high cognitive load makes for unpleasant reviewing. Anyone? I mean, some people like ferreting out what a person's doing in code, figuring out like just what kind of neat, cute tricks they're using. Now you want to just look at a piece of code, be able to confidently say, this looks right, I'm going to approve it, right? And the other thing about a cognitive load, and I used to be in a group where we wrote our own coroutines, and the code was incredibly complex, all right? And I went and spent 6 months banging my head on a wall to try and get a grip of this, and then I started refactoring all the interfaces, which were really poor. The code itself was really good, but the interfaces were poor. And I would talk to the other guy who was doing the reviewing, and I would say to him, how come you're reviewing that code as correct? Do you know what's going on? He's like, no, I don't know what's going on, right? So I just approve it and hope you catch it. Right? Really not the way to do it, because all you need is everybody doing that. Or if it's just one reviewer, you get this thing. And like I say, it's hard to propose alternatives. None of those code reviews ever got, you should do it this other way, right? Because you've no space left in your head to run alternate stuff through, right? And after some months of me figuring this code base, I was actually someone who did say, here's another way of doing things, right? And the guy was just blown away that actually someone was giving him actual feedback to his review other than, you would load it into C line and just pull the nits out of it and say, you forgot something here. And I also say that the worse the code base you're working in, which kind of mostly means legacy, but it can mean if you're template hell, right? Then the smaller the change package should be, right? The more serpentine stuff you're doing, the harder it is to grasp, the smaller those changes should be, and it should probably parceled out, unless you have any other, if you know other option. Right, and like I say, spacing, indentation, renaming, all these things should not hold up in any kind of code review. I've changed this function from apply to, I don't know, set the price, okay? It's easy, people just look at it, boom, it goes through. And I've done this with many PRs by splitting them out, and I really haven't ever got really big pushback or stuck in like, you know, code review hell where no one will review it or approve it. And the main thing to take away from this is that with code, with a large cognitive load, your feedback is probably going to be poorer. You have less people that can understand it, so less people that give you an opinion, less people to spot stuff. So they're inherently more risky. And, you know, no one likes risky changes going into production. Anyone, any comments on that? All right. Who here keeps the code review size down to about 500 lines of code? All right, 30%, not bad. I wish I could run metrics on your code base, all right, just to find out. So the other thing is timing, right? We always say there's a time aspect, right? Because as again, wiser minds have said, timing is everything, right? No change, and I've done this in a previous talk at length, no change is actually useful until it shows up everywhere in production. That's the definition of having something done, my definition of done, right? So if we look at this thing here, all right, I could say, like, let's make the reviews and stuff really small, right? Like rush through your reviews. But what's the big way of shortening the timeline down here?
The wait time.
Yeah, the waits, right? If I could do something like this, right, I improve the velocity of features through my group, right, into my system. All right, so one thing, all these long reviews, rewaiting periods to make it shorter. All right, so how do you do that? Well, I always say it's a sort of certain kind of madness to say, let's rush through. I'm too busy to review because I'm coding. All right, and then no one wants to do the reviewing. So where does your code go? It goes nowhere, right? We talked about it earlier, if you're waiting 3 days a week and everyone's waiting on everyone else, right? And that really will block all progress. And I find that not doing code reviews is a priority problem. And I ran a group one of the times and I said to them, there is a 24-hour limit on starting your review coming back, all right? So retention fades with time, right? I'm 2 weeks later, I'm on to something else and you give me my code review comments. I gotta update the repo. I might have conflicting changes by now. It's a whole bunch of hassle for me to figure out what's going on, right? But again, I say reviewers should have a standard response time to begin a review of about a day, all right? And I actually created this group, and all hell was breaking loose in code reviews, right? And what I did is at the stand up every day, I said, anyone submit a code review yesterday, or submit a PR yesterday? Whoever did. Have you got any feedback yet today? Well, I got it from him, but not him. What's going on? Oh, I'm going to be reviewing it right after the meeting, right? And because of that, the velocity and stuff, it became a very high throughput group of getting stuff done. Because it was very explicit that reviewing is more important than writing code. Because code that's been written is further away from getting into production than code that needs reviewing. And code that needs that final review of just, yes, you've taken my feedback, is stuff that's just a hair's width from getting out into the merged code base and getting into production. All right, and I think that the feedback from response should be similarly constrained. So it was like anyone here waiting on feedback from changes they asked for, right? 24 hours, again, this just greased up features going through. So who's responsible? I think it's the developer's responsibility to get a PR through to merging. Yes or no?
Bump after a while.
Yes. All right. So look, let me give you some hard data, right? Again, from this survey that was done. How often do you participate in any kind of review process? And it's found that the most satisfied teams are the ones doing daily code reviews, right? Which again ties into that 24 hours. I mean, it's kind of arbitrary, but the data shows that people are more satisfied when you're doing the code reviews daily, as opposed to weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly. I don't know who would do it annually, right?
So if someone answers to the question quarterly, they have a different understanding from code review than someone who says daily. I don't think when someone says quarterly code review, he's not talking about pull requests.
You might be right. I mean, to send the surveys out to developers, you would hope they would know what you were talking about, but it's not really there, right? So, feedback categories, right? We all have to give feedback in our reviews, right? So what kind of feedback categories are? I think there's 3 different approval outcome categories. All right. The first one is this is wrong. This is not a good solution. It's got an error. It's an outright problem. There's a mistake in here. So you give the right answer. By the way, your testing should have shown that you've no tests on this thing here, right? So it must be fixed. And that's something where you go, it's kind of non-negotiable, right? Second thing is you say, look, have you thought of doing it this other way? I think this is a better way to do it, right? And you might spend some time having to persuade them. It's probably not an outright blocker, but it's certainly going to delay you saying, yes, everything's okay, till you kind of have a bit of back and forth, right? And come to some agreement about should you be doing it this way or not. And then you also have the nitpicks, right? Where you say, look, I don't like your braces around an if statement with one line underneath it, or the opposite way around, right? You get into these kind of things where it's kind of trivial. I like my brace over here instead of underneath the if, right? I think these all, again, should be taken care of with automated tooling. But the show up, right? You don't have an underscore in your member variable, you just added to the class. And lastly, great job. Hey, I really like the way you factored this thing out. That's a neat way you got that thing to be tested. Like you do sort of say something on the good end and the good parts that were going on. But the thing that I think is missing in a lot of code reviews, you should be clearly denoting which category your feedback currently belongs in, the one you're given, right? Here I've used emojis, which I think is pretty neat, right? And if I have a code review come back to me, I scan down and just look for the red stuff, right? The stuff, that's the one I want to go to first off, right? And the other thing is, even if my stuff says, have you really thought about this? I may think, you can use all the soft language you want so you don't get anyone's backup, but that thing there means it's not going anywhere until you fix it, right? So it takes out some of the contention. How do you guys donate your feedback in your code reviews? You just hope the person can divine it?
We have another emoji where it's like a thought bubble, where it's like something to discuss. Like this isn't like it's not a blocker. I don't know if this is positive feedback, but it's just like I'm reading.
Sounds like that second one, right? Roughly that second category.
Well, no, it's not. It's not a delay. It's just more like while I was reading this, I thought of this. Let's talk about it.
But that's a delay,
it might
right?
Turn into a change that should happen, or maybe something that we'll do.
Right, but you all huddle and talk about it. That's essentially a delay, potentially, right? Especially if you can't agree.
Okay.
Right? I don't mean it's huge delays. I just mean like if all you got was nitpicks or great job, boom, you're off to the races, right? And the simpler the solution, usually, if you've the simpler solution, we'll talk about it later, the easier it is to get a code review done. All right, code reviews. Let's talk about some of the do's and some of the don'ts, all right? So one of the things I'm very heavy on is having a checklist, a code review checklist, right? So you standardize the basics, right? I work across the department of 25 teams, and the review process is so patchy and so different across these code bases that you think they're in different companies, right? So that is a real problem because all the lax stuff gets tangled up with the good stuff. And like if you let's say you don't use const correctness properly. Then I have all this const correctness in my group and I plug into your non-const correct stuff. And it's like, oh, I can't put a const into a non-const call. And now what are you going to do? Right? You got to go and jump on a bandwagon or say, look, I'll copy it into a non-const. right? And the other thing is reviewing code with the premise, and this is done a lot as code reviews. Does it just look like the stuff around it? It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. It's consistent, we're good. Right? Consistently bad is good. And the other thing I tried to do was drive the perception that a code review, a technical critique of a code review, is actually a way of collaborating and getting a better solution. I like having code reviews done by knowledgeable people because my solution turns out better in the end. I probably learn a thing or two, right? Even if it's just going back and forth and me explaining my stuff out, gives me more insight to the problem I'm trying to solve. All right, so you should drive it as a collaborative process and also train people to do it. I sit down regularly with people, grab a PR that they have and say, here's the checklist, let's go down it, right? Let's review your thing, see what happens, all right? And new features, new paradigms, right? How do you learn about them? C++, I don't know, Rust, Go, whatever you want. I assume I don't know, but I assume they're evolving somewhat rapidly as well, right? How do you keep up on all this stuff, right? So you can go to conferences like you good people do, right? You want to hear what's the latest and greatest, all right? Especially coming here. And then you have like things like training workshops, conference videos. You can't get here, go look at the videos, all right? And other thing is book and video clubs. I've seen it where a group has a video club, and they watch a talk. And they say, how could this be applied to our area, right? And you bounce things around. So these are ways of upping your, I'm going to say your base knowledge of what's in the language. Anyone any issue with that so far? Now this is the thing that really gets me, all right? Review your tests. Review them, please. I see code reviews go through and I say, did you review the tests? It's like, Pete, there's no test to review, right? How can I review the tests? It's exactly, right? Here's a little checklist for tests. Remember the second thing that said pass the code review is having unit testing, right? So I check for unit integration tests. If they're not there, that's one of them red emojis. Where are your tests? I'll need some tests to go anywhere forward. And I'm not looking at any of your code till that's done, right? Unless it's a draft PR, all right? Happy, unhappy path testing. I find people do either just the happy path. I had one just last week. It was like, here's the unhappy path test. Where's the happy path test? Well, you can't actually do a happy path test. I said, well, there must be something wrong in your solution, and there was, right? We went back and took a look at it. Yes?
In light of this, do you have like any kind of recommendations to convince some developers in your team or a company that tests are equally important than all other code? The thing is that
yes.
Many people like preaching tests like
so here's what I do.
Write it nicely and so on.
Yeah, here's what what works for me is going in, look at all the data and showing management all the outages we've had, all the rollbacks we've had, right? And the reasons for it, right? And then having, there's a general pervasive, like, when you ask for a small feature, it's taking 4 weeks to get done. Why is that, right? Probably it's because you have everything coupled every which way. It's very hard to work in a code base unless you know everything. So the way to get this to happen, and I'm going to show you some more ways, is hard data, right? Management will generally, or TLs will generally like the easy road, right? As will developers. I mean, you guys, maybe not you guys, but right, like the people behind you, right? They all have this thing of like, well, we can put the test in sometime later. We want to get this in now. It's going to be a quick win, right? And the tests never go in behind it. And then if you try and do any kind of refactoring, you don't want to do it because you're like, well, if I refactor this code, I think it's working, but I have no idea if it actually is, right? Your TLA plus kind of follows that idea, right? You have to be able to check it and make sure it works. All right. The other thing is that drives me crazy is test naming. I want to look at a set of tests and figure out did you skip something. And when the tests are just test 1, test 2, test 3, or, calling the function apply 1, apply 2, apply 3, I can't tell what the corner cases are. And I also can't tell whether expect equal permissions, comma, empty string. Like, what does that mean? Why is it an empty string? If you had at the top, stud string, no permissions is the empty string, and down here you said this equals no permissions, right? Your tests are much easier to read and reason about, all right? And do the act as usage examples. If you look at tests and you're like, I have no idea how this, especially unit tests. Integration tests, I'll give you a pass. But on unit tests, how do I use this class? I should be able to go to the test and see how all the functions work and what are the unhappy paths when they work. You got another one?
I just wanted to add probably one bullet to your list. It should be like probably check test composition, because I saw test files of 3,000 lines or something where everything in one file, nothing like.
These individual tests are in the one file?
Yes.
Yeah, that's bad. I don't think there's any class with 3,000.
Not just class, but all fixtures, all helpers, like all cases, pretty much everything, just because it was convenient.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and you know, you got to remember, I'm like a poor beggar man trying to get stuff done. Like stuff like that is like where the rich end of town is doing stuff, right? Listen, I want your fixtures properly sorted out and categorized and stuff. I'm just like, can I have a test? Right? I don't care why. Just give me the test to show. Right? I analyzed a couple of our repos, and I think 15% of the PRs that said fixing a bug had no test associated with it.
Okay, that's awesome.
Right? And I show management that as well. It's a way to get people to write tests. Okay? But again, review the freaking tests, right? It's one of the most important parts of the code review that we skip over. We're like, look, what's he doing? Man, he's using a variadic with a lambda, with a range hunting on the end. I'm getting all this stuff. And it's like, oh, what's the test? No one looks at the test. I'll assume he tested it, right? So code review don'ts. What don't you do in a code review? Right? Well, have bad preconceptions. All right. So the one that kills me the most is, does this code look like all the other code around it? Right? Now, if you're wondering what the little picture is like, we used to work with the picture of a flat earth, and it served us fairly well for a while. But now we say, you know what, we know it's a globe and we can fly around it. We don't drop off the edge. It's a better working model, right? So when you have this thing of like, the only thing you're supposed to do is keep the code consistent, you can keep consistently bad, right? Bad habits get to live on, they never get killed off. New features don't get used. So instead of using something like an optional for stuff coming back, we have a bool coming back and an in-out pointer, right? Because that's how we did it in the 90s, all right? And although the same look and feel is important, I'm going to say something a bit controversial now, right? And that is that consistency can be the enemy of progress, right? It can hold you back, trap you in old patterns, trap you in old ways of doing things because you want to be consistent. So the only way to get out of that, the only way to make new code with that mindset is how? It's a rewrite. You have to rewrite it from the ground up. All right. All right. We know how risky they are. Right. The other part of this is using a new thing everywhere. Right. I see it where the new thing comes out and everybody wants to use it in everything. I want to have concepts up the wazoo. I want to have ranges everywhere. What's coming out in the next standard? We just got upgraded to 20. Let me jump on this now. Right. And look, it's okay to say let's use them in moderation and test it out, but don't use new. Right. Again. Isn't a talk this morning, if you have a hammer, right, every hammer you have, like everything looks like a nail, so you just have no moderation of what you're doing. So the other thing is change for change's sake is a path to nowhere. Again, there was a group working on doing some refactoring for testability of this tool that we're doing a lot of changes and having a lot of problems with, right? And the TL, the technical lead, reaches back to me and says, Pete, can you look at this PR? Because lots of stuff got moved around, but I'm not sure anything actually got done. Right? He's like, they've certainly refactored and moved stuff around, but I don't know that there's any real purpose towards it, right? So I said, well, take a look and see what's going on, right? Even though I am the one who got his group assigned that work, right? And I said, look, they're not doing anything. They're just moving pieces around, right? If you want to say, what is that change for? And they say, well, it's for testability. Where are the tests that come about because of this change? Right? What changes are due to tests and what are just due to, I don't know, having mind games or playing around in the code base? So metrics. All right, this is how you convince, by the way, TLs and management and right up to department heads to do something about a poor code review process, right? How do you measure a code review process's effectiveness?
It's a good question.
Right. I mean, you could take a Gallup poll or what is a monkey poll or something, and you say, how do you feel about this and that? That's what the guys in the report did. I'm more of a hard-driven metrics guy, right? Because if I say, oh, you know, I think people just feel better. When I go to management, they say, you know, sit down, Pete. We've got like work to do, right? So one I've started putting in, and we're now trawling the whole of our department for, is tests for PR, right? Has the PR got some, I'm not even saying what the test is, has it done anything in the test folders? Has anything happened in the testing area, right? And what this has allowed to have happened, I won't give numbers because they were frightening, right? And I work at a really good company, right? So you get a heat map of the whole department. And we can say the whole department has 5 management organizations in it. And I can say, looking across these 5 management organizations, this one has 80% with testing. This is 20, this is 80, this is 85, this is 90. So where do we go take a look? We go look at this manager, what's going on with your area? But that breaks down further than that. You just look in his area and see, well, he has teams with 80, 85, 90, and 2 teams with 0. Right? So you know where to go after it. Right? So that's part of like showing these statistics to management, right, has a real trickle-down effect, right? And that's how you convince people to do that. Other things you could do is lines per PR, right? Again, look at your groups across your area. These have always massive PRs, and they seem to have a lot of outages, and it seems to take a long time to get stuff through the review process. So that's where you target. You go down there, I don't mean target as put a bullet in them. I mean, you go down there and say, where you need some help. What do you need? Yes.
Just a question: how do you measure test per PRs? Like, what kind of tools are you using?
To be honest, just a Python script asking the Git repo, right? What's changed, and is anything in a unit test, integration test directory? Right now it's Boolean, but we're moving to go and like count the, you know, test under F test. We use Google test. See if we can count that. Right now, I'm just saying, is there anything going on? Right. Lines with PR, right? Like I said, I asked you guys, who does 400 to 500 lines? I think is comfortable. I know if I get a 400 line PR, unless it's just very, very dense technical template stuff or something, it's pretty easy to see what's going on. All right, other measures, and these are ones that came up when I was doing a dry run. I was trying to brainstorm with a bunch of people. Time to review. We talked about that wait at the beginning, which I think is the biggest wait. What is the time delay between you submitting your PR and someone getting back with the first review comment? All right. It turns out like these teams, it's about a week. These teams are about a day. These guys look like they're much more productive. Well, again, let's go help the guys who have the wrong priorities on code reviewing. Right. Time to merge, right? Track the velocity. Like how long is it taking from putting something into a merge? And I mean median time, right? We're going to have different types of reviews, but something to play with. And the other thing that people don't think about is the reviews per person, right? Are we bottlenecking on someone? Is someone in our area doing all the reviews, right? He's seen as the very knowledgeable guy, so everything pumps through him. Again, that's not the way to do it. We talked about balancing the workload and having this sort of including of people in your group, right? And also you get more shared ownership. It's not just you and one guy who probably gets aloof and really teed off having to do so many code reviews what he thinks is bad code. Other counts, how many PRs are outstanding at any one time, right? Or over any one duration, right? How many? The average or median age of a merged PR, how long is it taking PRs to get merged, right? And I don't know why, I mean, codebases, I mean, you can put the hooks in, right? To say, if a PR is over, I don't know, pick it, a month old, auto close it. Right, just close it when the reviewer goes, oh, developers, well, why didn't you go after? I mean, it's sitting around a month, right? I'm assuming if it's a month, no one cares about it, right? It's a pet project or something. This is dangerous, but I put it up there because someone suggested it. The number of PRs you get merged per sprint. I think this will tend to encourage people to do superficial, short reviews. So I wouldn't even show it. If I was measuring this, I don't know if anyone's heard of like Foundation and Harry Seldon. You know, you can't let the people know they're being monitored for this kind of stuff, right? You can.
I was going to have that question about all of these metrics. Like, who do you show these metrics to? Is this just for the TLs or?
No, everybody.
Everybody, because
Test for P. Well, let me say the test for PR. Everybody. Right. I mean, why would I hide it from someone?
I mean, you could. I mean, this might be a good thing though, but like that would, if it gets gamified, developers might start.
Yeah. No,
smaller
you're.
tests, which I guess that'd be good, right?
Yes. Look here. This is what you're talking about, right? People know how to game the system. Right. What do you do? Yeah. Well, that's why it has to have a code review checklist attached to it, so people aren't just putting in return true in a test or something like this. All right. But yeah, I mean, who do you show this to? I want to show it to everybody. Some of them I don't really want to measure because it really will encourage bad practices, right? How can we did, 15 PRs this sprint, right? And it turns out like the PRs are really, lots of them are really piddling, right? It's just a matter of gaming the system. But yeah, you gotta figure out what's going on and figure like a way of that not happening. But test for PR, right? Someone games the system by putting in empty tests. Well, the guide just says, ensure you have proper testing. And it says, look for corner cases, look for happy, unhappy path. Now, if you say, well, why did you approve that? Well, now you got a difficult conversation. Not for me asking you explaining it to me, right? It's going to be a bit difficult. Yeah, so let's look at another graph of this code. Do you have a question?
Yeah, just in light of this, like, when you say put an empty test or something, should or can the test count per PR be replaced with test coverage? Or disqualified? No, and it's the first thing that people jump to. Do we have code coverage? And I know in Misra and stuff like this, they want 100% code coverage. Code coverage, I think, is like a third order effect, right? In other words, I'm running through some piece of code. Is the test correct, right? Are you doing anything worthwhile? Have you got like silly tests just to go through it? So, and what happens is with code coverage, any place, I'm guessing except for the Misra space, where you say I have a code coverage thing on it, right? It gets lowered. Right, we had a repo which each like buildable folder in it had a thing saying what was the code coverage supposed to be, and if it went below that, it failed. Right, I found parts of that set at 6%. Right, code coverage, because what happens is you say, well, it's 80%, but I'm doing 75, and all you got to get is your friend to say it's okay for you to lower that number in the file. That's what I call the handshake effect. Right, so teams that report on their code review process are 3 times as likely to be satisfied with their code reviews. I was surprised when I seen that, because it would seem to me that all of you guys, which is me as well, prefer not to have too much monitoring, right? Because we're doing our individual brilliance. We're not understood by the outside world, just what we're doing and how well it is. Like after our lifetime, people will look at this and gaze in wonder, right? But it turns out that if you have these metrics, and I think it's going to be painful at the start, but once you're in that mindset or the culture has changed, you're going to be happy, right? Look, here's the metrics. We went from 20% PRs with testing to 40 to 60 to 80. Who won't feel good about that? Right, now the next thing is so we've been talking about PRs and stuff like this. Not all PRs are equal, right? There's some PRs that have a really large blast radius, right? You're going to take things down. Another one you just might get something that's a little wrong, or in some particular case, really corner case, it goes wrong. So if it's a functional change that is small and well-defined, that usually means there's a single right answer. It's low risk. You don't need many people involved. You don't need to do, I'm going to say, super scrutiny. You do need to make sure it's working, but you don't need to perseverate on it, right? Or if you're doing larger architectural changes or new ways of doing business or bringing a new product type, something like this, right? You've got larger considerations.
So there's way more risk, right? New interfaces have been developed. You're laying interfaces down for the next 10 or 15 years of people using your code. These things, right, need to have a lot more scrutiny, which means more people looking at the review and more in-depth scrutiny of what's in that change. Everyone okay with that? All right. So who?
But
Yes.
the question, how do you distinguish this between large and small? Do you have any automation on it? No, I understand that, but this is like every person who reviews that are supposed to distinguish them, right? And if you sometimes doesn't have a domain knowledge, you might think, oh, that's a small fix, but overall that might be a big one.
Well, usually I think if you don't know enough to work on a big architectural change or a real shift in what you're doing, you'll usually have someone who does, right? Or you'll have the TL say, this is a really big change, you're on it, make sure this is right, and drag all the other people in your team in as well, because we get this wrong, really bad things happen, right? And again, this is something I would put in the description.
Yeah, I was just more wondering if you have some, like, when you collect the statistics or metrics, you can kind of.
Yeah, it's a tougher one, right? You can only use the proxy of maybe number of lines change, but then it turns out that someone's renamed the function, or they've got an editor that chopped spaces, the last guy didn't, right? Hadn't it set that way? So again, it's not going to be perfect, right? You're gonna have to say, well, this was a false positive. But I think that's only when you get most everything working correctly, which I don't believe we're there yet in lots of places. All right, what else? Yeah, so who should be in a code review?
The expert
An expert?
on that part of the code.
Domain expert.
What if the expert is dead and buried, right? It's legacy code. Right? He bought the farm a year ago.
The expert's writing the code.
No one's wrote the code. He's gone, the guy who wrote it. I'm telling you, when I was doing Linux migration, I came across a problem. No one could figure out what it was. And it turned out to be there was a configuration file no one knew about that hadn't been touched in something like 8 years. Right? The knowledge had passed out of existence. All right? So stuff like that. What do you do? Well, your peers, you drag in TLs, right? And that's if we're all happy. It's a low severity change. We're all understanding what goes on. This is as far as it goes, right? If it gets bigger and nastier or harder to figure out what's going on, you start dragging in the domain experts, right? Like people who know the history of the code. You think, well, this is the change. It's going to be really easy. And it's like, well, you don't know. I have a lot of times like, I was doing the migration. This is how we're going to move this section of the market over. And it turns out in the foreign exchange, we have an extra set of stuff that you don't know about that's in there. That's going to cause you big problems. So you need people who know the history. Usually the guys who know where the bodies are buried, like put the bodies there in the first place, right? But you need to talk to these guys. All right? And I don't care how small the change is. I think you need at least 2 reviewers on every single PR. And again, when I run groups, I mess with the Git repo so that it takes 2 approvals, right? To be said that this is okay. Because 1 approval is just about the worst thing, right? Me and Steve are equally incompetent, and we approve each other's code, right? And that's how large bits of technical debt or technical neglect get in there. So as you increase severity, more people, all right, and more knowledgeable people. Stages of a code review, right? So you're writing code. I call John over. Hey, John, take a look at this. What do you think? I'm not sure if this is the way to go, right? That's a code review, informal chats. Should be doing a lot. I do a lot of that, right? Then you get to the one we're all familiar with. Here's my PR. Take a look at it. Tell me what you think, right? You can also have. I've had times where I say, I think you might want to consider this. No. I don't want to even think about it. And then I got to go over, sit down and say, look, let's work this through, right? If there's enough contention, I got to sit down and work through, right? And the other thing then is if there's still a bunch of tension between me and the other guy or it's such a big project, then I got to start dragging maybe my whole group in or stakeholders in, right? To say, listen, are we looking for these characteristics of the solution, right? And again, how do you know? Because we say, how do you know this is needed? You always know by a big discussion going back and forth in the PR, right? And to me, that's noise. If you got a big discussion going back, well, I don't agree with this. Well, I don't agree with that. Yeah, but that sucks. Yeah, this sucks, right? And it just goes on and on and on. When I go to look at the code review, I'm like, what is actually a germane comment that's going in there? And I just say, if you back and forth more than twice, go offline, discuss it, and come back with the resolution of what you came up with, not the whole process of getting there. So that the code reviews just have germane stuff in it. We're doing it this way as discussed, right? Personality conflicts, you have them, right? We're human, right? I am universally lovable, but not everybody is, right? So you might have, this guy ticks me off, you know? And then the old versus new thinking, I'm running that a fair amount. And it's like, look, passing pointers around is really efficient. And I'm like, we have 25 years of engineering telling us this is not the way to go. Yeah, but it's efficient. You know, prove it to me. So if this is going on in your code review, right? I just decided to get really wild with image generation. You've all this stuff going on. I notice in the top right, we have a turtle getting a code review, right? And the bottom right, we have a rabbit, right? Feeling like he's been left out. I think they came in from the rabbit turtle picture I had from earlier on. What happens when you have all this bad stuff, right? You have a poor code review process, so stuff is not being caught. There's a lot of friction in your team. Half the team's at war with the other half. There's an us and them. There's the senior, crusty, you know, fossilized crowd, and you have the new wave, flamboyant, hopping around the place like new wave crowd wanting to do it, and they're all getting against each other. So they only review each other's stuff, right? You got a schizoid code base. So how do we fix some of that? Well, how do we teach and reinforce good practice on code reviews? Anyone got any suggestions? This slide I left intentionally blank.
By doing them well and showing people.
Yeah, but saying doing them well is just like, it has the same information content as, right? It has no, how do you do them well? Right, like I say, a code review checklist. I am pushing this all around my department, and I have got buy-in from management because I've shown them lines for PR statistics across the whole area, so everybody's into it. It standardizes what goes on across the whole group, at least a basic standardization, all right? It removes contention. Hey, you're doing this. Well, I want to do that. Well, I don't want you to do it that way. No, look, just look at the checklist. It's on there. You're not supposed to be doing that, right? And then the checklist should be kept short, right? It shouldn't be like reams and reams of stuff because no one will read it then. So you add common mistakes seen on PRs, and as it gets around this mistake that used to be around very common, you may consider removing it. Okay. And who was saying something was pairing up, and like I do a ton of this stuff, right? Sitting down with people to reinforce the basics of code reviewing, how to properly analyze a piece of code, given the requirements that are given, hopefully in the description, right? How is your naming? How is your testing, right? What is going on over here? Because this looks like really turgid and hard to figure out. And there's no documentation and the code's not expressive, right? And once you do that, you create new champions. You say, look, go forth and, you know, help other people. And this one, I think, is not done very often. And I found this incredibly useful, again, when I was taking this team basically from nowhere. They didn't know how to even clone out a Git repo. Was, let's take it, all sit down as a group and walk through a code review of this thing. All right, let's see what was missing, what was not done. And we did this a few times, and then I stopped doing, I would only code review if something was missing. And then we would come along another time and say, well, so how did we miss this thing? What were we not looking for? What's on the checklist we were missing? And then what happens, I was able to take my hands off the process entirely. I just do spot checking here and there. And have real confidence, good code is being looked at in a timely manner and getting out to production in a timely manner, right? And to this day, it's one of the most performing groups we have. I don't run them anymore because I was using them for Linux migration. And when I successfully did that, I said, you can now manage them, right? and more going after technical problems. So how do you gauge progress, right? Metrics, right? Metrics is a great thing, as long as you don't have people gaming the system. That's why it's paired with a code review checklist. So you can't say, well, I didn't know, all right? Spot checking of PRs. Dropping in, just say, hey, how did this get through the code review process, right? Let me pull the reviewer out and the guy who did it, right, to see what the blame is. The learning experience that we're talking about. And then if we have drift or evolution, I expect these things to evolve over time. These are guidelines, not a manifesto or I'll put you in the firing squad if you don't follow these rules. These are something that should be a base, and each team should be iterating and getting something like maybe to where your area is doing something a bit different. You get different stuff. And when you do that, you should, after you I have confidence in a group or an area, it's like, you guys now take it from here. I'm not sitting around, as a lifelong spot checker, right? You guys know what you need to do, take your own feedback and evolve the process. Anyone, right, it's common sense, right? Does anyone have this going on at their place of employment? No, you don't. You do? Is it just you? And this guy? All right, cool. All right, so.
Oh, yeah, I get lots of constructive feedback.
You have what?
I get lots of constructive feedback.
Cool. I think it's gotten a lot better over the years. I think it used to be fairly almost nasty, right? It's gotten a lot better with our evolving of how we're thinking and stuff. We're getting better at it. But there's still some problems. All right. So let's talk about the do's and don'ts of giving feedback. So we talked about giving constructive feedback. Even if I spot something that's a really valid problem, I can present that in a way just to tick the other person off, right? That they're just going to stick their heels in and stick on other stuff that's not the main problem, right? So the do's, be specific. I think there's a problem here and right here, and here's exactly why I think that's the case, right? And again, praise the good stuff, right? This gets people feeling a code review is not you're up on a witness stand. So you wrote this code. I want to treat the witness as hostile, Your Honor, right? Stuff like this. It's supposed to be collaborative. So what don't you do? Well, have this harsh, judgmental tone. I love this thing here that got generated. He's not only giving a thumbs down, he's speaking it as well, right? It's like, harsh judgment, right? This sucks. I don't think this is right. You're wrong. All right. Vague, or I don't like the look of this. I'm not going to say why, but I don't like the look of this, so I don't want to approve it. Or again, you're reviewing the developer, right? Like, this guy really always cheeses me off. And like I say, you put a punch in there and say, like, look, what the hell happened with you here? That should be an option. All right. So, DBAD, anyone know what that means? Don't be a detractor, right? Or a douche, right? You fill your own in, right? So let's talk about common pitfalls. What are the common traps we fall into with the code review process? Well, what are these, we get all this friction. Again, I've been in groups, there's a lot of friction going between people, and they are a poor performing group. So if you think this is not, this isn't like the latest view, we're not dropping 3 here, this is all bogus, right? You're going to find yourself running into a sort of a quicksand and getting nothing done because of all the friction. So slow and rushed reviews, one-pointing attention, poor feedback, and poorly given feedback are other things that cause a lot of friction. Large, complicated PRs. I'm going to say now I don't think there's a need for them. You can have a really complicated, small, isolated piece that someone can get their mind on. But for the most part, I see lots of PRs that are way too complex without needing it to be that way. Focus on style, not substance. When you can't figure out what's actually going on, you pick on little stuff. When I see a code review that's just all this little, what I call death by 1,000 nitpicks, and he or she expects every single nitpick to be addressed, I don't say ignore it. I read it and then ignore it. Right? And then reviewee fatigue, right? There is who here There's someone that when he gets pulled into a code review, you're like, he is a giant pain in my keister, right? This guy just causes me a lot of aggravation, right? He's pedantic. He goes through everything, right? You've all got one of them, and you've also got people where you go, man, I love this guy doing code reviews. He's insightful, and usually my solution's better at the end. And you want more of those kind of guys. More common pitfalls, right? So how do you go from this guy, see him, to this guy? You grow a beard. See all you guys with beards, y'all look very happy, No, how do you reduce code review friction, right? You set the shared expectations. And that can be done somewhat that will be done quite a bit in your code review checklist, right? And a bit with the management of saying, and you must follow it, all right? Use the checklist, right? You're going to hear checklist a lot. I find it one of the most powerful tools of upping people's game. Use specific and respectful language. Again, it's a little touchy-feely, but that's the way you should be doing it, right? Hey, don't try and give most feedback in the form of a question. Have you considered? I think maybe. All right, this looks like it might have, what do you think? All right, because some people, when you go, this is wrong, it just sets their hackles up, right? They're just like, they go into bulldog mode, right? Beast mode, and they come after you. So the other thing is all team members participate in the review process. Now, I don't mean all team members participate in every PR, right? I mean that when you take the aggregate of all the PRs that have happened, let's say in a month or a sprint, everybody's had an equal portion of it. The experienced guys are there doing their thing. The junior people are looking at that and learning from it to do that so they can do better code reviews. All right. Celebrate good PRs, right? Celebrate good times. Come on. Right. Let's have a celebration. Right. Helpful reviews. There's a couple of guys I use like a lot for reviews, and I just love the feedback. Like I say, I honestly believe my PRs look so much better after getting that feedback. It's like if they were out on vacation, I'm like, I don't know if I want to submit a PR today. Right, they're out. But if I had more people like that, and we trained more people like that, I wouldn't have to be worrying about this thing, right? Just have the odd curmudgeon you have to worry about. More common pitfalls, and this is one I come against, and I don't quite have a solution. So you guys might be able to give me a solution here, right? So what happens is I come along and I say, I have an open mind. I hope you have one too. I think this is not a good way of doing things. You're passing a bool and an in-out pointer instead of an optional. You're taking in-out pointers in for a vector because you're saying you want to reuse the memory. I don't know. All these strange ways we used to do things. All right, and you say, look, it's been shown and here's talks and metrics and stuff not to do it. And the person retreats to an extreme corner case and they say, look, when this thing happens here, and my thing is like we're passing a vector pointer in and a void back. Why aren't we just passing the vector back? It's like, well, if we have a vector which has a very fast caching way of allocating memory, we want to be able to pass that in. I was like, why don't we just make one of those and pass it out? And I went and I asked the guy beside him a little while later, do you actually use special like allocators and stuff? Like, no. Right? So this is just retreating into a corner case to try and say, I don't want to do I don't want to do a change because I'm not willing to change, right? And if someone says to me, 1 in 1 trillion, we're going to get 5 times the latency. I'm like, well, okay, I'll pay that bill every trillion times. But the other 9, I don't have to worry about it. We should be optimized for happy path. The next thing they retreat, and I've done this for a few people, is to start talking about the negative cost of doing things, right? In other words, hey, it's going to be less performant. I said, theoretically, maybe. Have you got any measurements? Well, no. You can't actually measure this code. It's legacy, and we can't get a handle on it, right? It's disruptive. We're in the middle of doing things. Our feng shui in the group is our mojo is really going along this way. We'd have to upset a lot of people. And it's like, yeah, again, consistency can be bad. And the last thing you'll get is disengagement. I literally had one group say to me, well, okay, we're going to go away, and they're using pointers everywhere, right? We're going away, look at your code review guidelines. come up with one of our own and maybe adopt that sometime down the line. Right? That's just like, I don't want to hear any more of what you're saying right now. How do you go after this? Anybody? Let's say it's a whole team, or the people in control of the team are doing this.
It's a big question.
Right, well, you're in a really Shangri-La fairy tale work environment, so I won't get anything out of you, right? Just the rest of us, right? So look, if you're actually in that group as a junior developer, I'm going to say all hope is lost, right? You just got to throw like a grappling hook over the wall. If you're someone like, you're someone that's not that worried about things, you go up another level of management, which is what I do. I just say, look, your whole team here looks like it's got an issue. Here's the metrics, and it's not my problem, right? You figure out whether you want to change or not, because I'm not getting into any fights with a whole team over bad practices. So basic checklist. What would a code review checklist look like? How am I doing for time?
10 minutes.
I am close to the end, but. I can't show it. Yeah. All right. Forget it. That was always going to be the most dicey part. But I do have a backup, right? So I have this very small checklist document. The first page is about timings and blast radius and waiting 24 hours for starting a review. And then we get on to the general checklist, right? Which is for, I think, any language, doesn't matter what the language is. Are you meeting the requirements of what you're supposed to be doing without premature optimization or very cute, right, complication? Which I think if you've been in too complicated a solution, that's tech debt. That's not a good thing. Sizing cognitive load, we talked about this, right? The risk of the changes, we talked about this. Are the changes self-documented or unduly surprising? And self-documented means that you name stuff properly. The class is named this, not all right, because you're taking all the things out, right? With pricing on the end, right, or something like this. Mm-hmm. What are your function calls? Your function calls should be generic names that don't tell you anything. You have this big comment. This is figuring out the median price of blah, 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 blah. And it's called, I don't know, something like apply instead of median price or count median price, right? That's what I mean by self-documenting. Do they adhere to local reasoning? And there's not these incidental data structures and all this, so I don't know. I see a pattern where someone takes a mutable member reference out of a class and passes it all over the place. I have no idea what happens if I change this class. And view the surrounding code for context, otherwise you won't find refactoring opportunities. Right? You're just looking at a little tiny piece of the code, and the big one for me, has sufficient testing been added? Functionality been cobbled together. In other words, I have a class that's doing, and I mean like the actual code for 10 different things is in there. Separate them out, the class can just call these 10 classes. And this one you shouldn't be doing, right? Does the code look like everything around it? Unless the code is doing all of this stuff. And then I have another page, that's just a page, another page with C++. Look for const override correctness. Magic numbers and strings. When you in the document you open this, it has like, it actually says especially in tests, right? Because where we do the worst. The stuff I do see, right? This is all the stuff I do see going on that I want people to stop doing, right? And it's not like it showed up one time. It showed up in other various code bases in various spots. Leverage use of context for const eval. This is big for legacy code bases, right? They're like, well, why? It's like, because all the undefined behavior gets caught by the compiler, right? That's a great win. You don't have to do anything other than put lots of just context for the damn thing. One that got us was the proper use of assert and expect. People were using assert in everything in their test. Assert the value, assert equal this, assert this, assert. That just means that the test stops at the first bad comparison instead of expect. Assert is when you assert the pointer is non-null, because the next one I'm going to look at the pointer. Assert the optional has something in it before I start asserting what's inside of it. All right, so that was getting us. So very quickly, lastly, when I put the code review checklist out for people to look at, one of the biggest comments I got was, this should be in a coding standard, right? So is there a difference between a coding standard and a review checklist?
Yes.
What's the difference, David?
the coding standard or specific things about what you put in the code.
Hmm?
The code review checklist should have on it, you're following the coding standard, but it has all the other things about,
But what is the other thing?
all the things you had 2 slides ago.
Yeah, okay. Kind of got me there. Stuff on the previous slide. That's true, right? Yeah. So you're pretty correct, right? And I had to think about this because people were like, make a coding standard, and I'm like, well, let's see, right? So a code review checklist is focused on specific code-based changes, making sure we get done what we're trying to get done. Coding standards is just general coding, how you generally do stuff, right? We accomplish specific goals, so we have to look at the specs and what's been done. Coding standards just general best practices and patterns to follow. You should have concise, actionable items in your checklist, meaning you see mine is basically 2 pages long, right? A coding standard would never be 2 pages long, and no one's going to go down like a comprehensive, detailed explanation of everything that goes on and where you're supposed to do it as part of a code review. It's just too much. Populated with common mistakes to look for in your PR, like I say, where the standard is all kinds of everything, right? And there's some example. The funny thing is, a few of these people who said this should be in a standard, I went and said, well, sure, where's your standard? Well, we don't have one, right? And I said, well, did you ever have one? Well, we tried to do one 6 months ago and we just stopped doing it, right? Because it's long, it's weighty, it's very verbose, takes a lot of time and effort. It's much easier to get going on a checklist. Code review checklist. Oh yes, look, more data, Bob. Look at this. Team has guidelines for how reviews should be performed. The satisfaction is huge when you have people able to just follow a simple checklist and not have to fight with people over this is just your thing and my thing is different. Right? Yeah, so I think I'm close to the end. What are the core objectives of a code review? Right? Correct, which is what we all focus on, but also should be fit for purpose, long-term health, and fast. And I don't mean fast by giving bad superficial reviews. The process should be, I don't want to say agile, but should be fairly spry. But also you should be doing these things here. And if you're not doing these things with your code review, your team is missing out. All right, get on the bus. Culture, right? How do we establish a strong, in recap, culture? Standardize the basics. No contention about what it is. We've all agreed. Encourage self-reviews, right? So I don't have to look at dopey code mistakes because you didn't look at your own code first. Good metrics. You want to track and see improvement. Be able to say, hey, well done. You guys have gone from this to this. Great. Ensure we have constructive feedback. In other words, it's a convivial, congenial kind of tone, not like, you're lobbing grenades over your cubicle wall. The group code review, the walkthroughs. If you don't do this, do it, unless you're a group of one. Normal mistakes should be, I said normalize mistakes as learning opportunities, meaning when you find them in a code review. Right? When you find them in production, I don't see that as much of a learning thing, right? That's just you messed up. But if you're walking through stuff and you say, look, if we're doing a group walkthrough, there's a possibility people think like they're being put upon. I'm looking at your stuff and all the people get to sort of like criticize you. But if you try and say, no, this is just, we're trying to figure stuff out. And everyone gets to do it in a loop. At some stage, the code comes out. It works. And then this process should always iterate and evolve. In other words, what I'm given is guidelines. It's not hard and fast rules. It's not the rules. It's the guidelines of a checklist. And we are finally done. I thought this would be an hour's presentation. So thank you, guys. Here's other talks if you're interested in my particular style. And questions? Yes. You were up first by like a half second.
I know there's no silver bullet answer for this, but just curious your thoughts on encouraging versus enforcement. So it sounds like you enforce 2 reviews per PR, but maybe you encourage that there's tests by publishing the data. But you could enforce tests on the PR, right?
No, we will be enforcing it, but I can't do it now or I'll grind the whole department to a halt, right? Because until I get that up to a sufficiently high level that there's only noise, and there's some false positives, I can't say in the CI, I could do it. The CI, if you don't see any tests, reject it. But that would bring things to a stop. We've got to climb the ramp. So Bob, you're next.
So there's an unstated assumption here that, at least in the examples that you've given, that this is an established code base. And you're making changes, the code's evolving.
Yeah.
To what extent, if any, do your recommendations change for greenfield development?
Not much.
Okay.
Not much. I mean, the reason I say like legacy code base is like when I was first doing C++ 30 odd years ago, right? All my appointments were, we're building a new system. We're doing this. In the last 15, 20 years, it's all been, we're updating, upgrading a system. So there's very few, I mean, if you're in the startup space, yes, right? But if you're in the startup space, why would you let all this thing build up to such a degree that you have to dig yourself out 5 years later? Yes.
Yeah, I'm worried about enforcing tests because it conflicts with the goal of having small PRs that you can get through easily. Like often when I have like a large PR and I like to split things up so that there's like, I notice a small thing, I'm like make one big PR and then I have a small PR afterwards that just like fixes a small thing or like makes a small change that I noticed at the same time. The second one's not going to have a test on it because it's just like a tiny thing afterwards.
I gotta say, you surprised me, right? Because I was at your talk yesterday about fixing the glibc bug, right? And I brought up the testing with you, right? It's like, this is why you can't go from 0 to 100, like just put it in your CI checks, right? But you have to say, as a general principle of software engineering, if you make a change that changes behavior, something should test that change. And if you're saying, well, no, I don't, you're sliding into quick wins mentality. We can get this in. Or you have something where you say, look, when we go into and we blow production up 6 ways to Sunday, it's fine. It's not that important. We'll just put something out after. I think Facebook had that ideology for a while, right? We don't want to do much testing because it's a lot of hassle. And when people complain, so you didn't get your latest update in Facebook, it's not a big deal. But I think that in most, it's certainly where I am. Putting code in without testing, I can demonstrate why that is a really bad idea.
Yeah, but also the second one might be covered by tests in the first one or something. Like if I have a big thing and I split some small things out, they might just be covered by like it's a separate PR.
You'd have to show me something on Godbolt that looks like that, because I find that I have a lack of imagination. That you're saying, well, if you refactor with changing no functionality, yes. But if you change anything that goes on in the observable behavior, test.
Right.
I don't agree with this principle, so I'm going to make an argument for it. I have added features. The features are very complex.
Yeah.
And when you look at the PR, the feature is 500 lines of code.
Okay.
But in order to accurately test it, it is 2,000. And so that to me kind of gets into
Yeah, I think you need to sit down and figure out like what we call equivalence classes for testing and stuff like this.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. But I think that's the one case where I could see maybe an argument. I don't necessarily agree with it, but if you're trying to keep them small, I can see your second.
Yeah. Did you at the back have something? One of you guys had a hand up, I thought. Oh, was you?
This might be a topic for after, but you were focusing here on PRs, like code changes, but I'm wondering your thoughts on like larger, like going and looking at a chunk of code that like after we've developed something for a couple months, like let's all go and review a larger piece of code, like a code review of something that's already there.
Yeah, again, it's a guideline, right? You can say, look, we want to map that, or you could even say a lot of this stuff goes with when you're doing ADRs. You're designing solutions, let's do something similar. It's a small thing, it's just a couple of us in the group. It's a bigger thing, the whole group. It's bigger than that, you drag some other groups in, right? So you can, again, I'm trying to give you a way of thinking of things, not like photocopy that checklist and just take it home and blindly use it, right? It's to try and give you the principles of what you do to have. Because look, what are we ultimately trying to do as developers, right? And I have another talk, code completeness, right? Which is, we're trying to get the business objectives fulfilled so that they make money and we get good reviews and we make money too, right? And that means we have to get good change through production reliably into the user space. That is our end goal, and this helps that. And when you show managers, and you may have to go up maybe a level or two, but you show a manager stark evidence that this is a problem and it's stopping that from happening, usually get them on board. And this is the other thing, like, I don't know, 40% of my job is showing managers stuff and convincing them to go along with what I'm saying, right? Because they won't just do it on their own. You have something, John, or are you just trying to look very pensive?
I had a thought. It's not really a question, but the way I think about code is that, trying to be const correct is not that hard. It's not that hard to be const correct.
No.
And not leaking things. It's not really that hard. But when you have to write code that does all those things, that's hard. That's why we have bugs. It's because you're trying to do 20 things, and I'm writing this function. And
and if you're doing 20 things in a function, I would say, John, you need to decompose that into 20 other things, and then pull them together.
I'm making certain that I'm reentrant. I'm making certain I'm not leaking. I'm making certain I'm const correct. That's what I mean by 20 things. It's not that I'm doing 20 actions.
Right.
But my point is that my approach to doing a code review was to have this checklist. It's going to be const correct. It's going to be reentrant. It's going to be whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I would ignore everything else except that. And I'd look at everything, ignoring everything except const correct. So only looking for const correct. And then I go back over it and I would look for, are there leaks here? Because I think
that's fine. You want to do it as 3 passes, right? You're going to say this, and then this, and then this, and then this. That's fine.
Right, and I just think that's
as long as before you hit the submit, you've done that, right?
Because it's the same. It's the code writer is not doing that. They have to write everything and they have to think about everything. Now, maybe they should make their own self-review in that way.
Yes, they should.
But you don't start a function by saying, okay, I'm going to make this function const correct. You have to think about what is this function doing, and while you're doing that, you make it const correct.
No, you can make it const correct at the back, at the middle, at the front, right? You put a const on something. I don't think I have to write a full function to know that this parameter is a const, or the function's const.
Right, but what I'm saying is the challenge of coding is that we have so many things going on, and we have to be right.
Even more reason why we have to follow this kind of stuff.
Right, and that's why I think the review should, as I said, instead of looking at the code and saying, is this code wonderful and perfect as it is, to break it down and saying, is it this characteristic? Ignore everything else and just say, is it this? And then make another pass and say, I'm looking for this kind of problem. And I just think that was actually, I took less time doing code reviews that way. I felt more confident about them afterwards than to try to just look at the code and say, are there any errors of any kind here?
Like I said, these are guidelines, map them to your own user space. I have to wrap it up. I didn't realize I'm 8 minutes over. Again, thank you for coming to the talk, guys.